Hey everyone, so I've been asked how do I paint my copper patina on my Unicorn Liberty. So I wanted to kind of show the process. I like to use these PLA plastic sheets. I cut them into 3-inch squares. I like this honestly a lot better than spoons because I'm able to test out my whole paint process. So let's go ahead and get started. Follow along if you can, but I'll go through my process here. So first up, we go ahead and take a thinning solution. I use all Vallejo products currently, so it's 2 parts thinner, 1 part flow aid. Gonna go ahead and put, I think, about 10, 15 drops in the glass. I like to use these shot glasses because then after I put in paint, I can go ahead and stir everything up, take a look at my consistency, and see if we're gonna be able to have a good time spraying or if I need to adjust the paint any. So I'm adding in a few drops here, about 10 to 15. I like to do a 1-to-1 ratio, sometimes a touch more paint, just depending on how warm or cold it may be in the house. Using a old airbrush needle that I've bent on the end so I don't end up hurting myself there, but spin it here in the shot glass, and then I will run it up here on the side and take a look at my consistency. You're looking for, everyone says skim milk, but I like to see how the paint's looking. Looking for some good opacity here. How is it adhering to the glass? Is it running down too fast? Is it going down like sludge? But here I'm pretty happy with it, so I'm going to go ahead and load it into the brush. All right, the brush I'm using is a Ultra 2024 from H&S. I'm going to go ahead and get the sheet out here, and I like to put down 1 to 2 mist coats in a different spray pattern just to give the paint something to adhere and bite to. Always start with a mist coat first. If you just go ahead and spray heavy, your paint's going to run all over the place and you're going to end up with having a really bad time. So I'm going pretty heavy here, but I like to have at least a half overlap of the previous spray. This allows for good coverage and good adhesion on any paint color that you're doing. So go ahead and just check in here, giving a little air in between, but going over it with a good second coat. 2 to 3 coats will always do you when you're doing a color. Okay, and I'm just kind of checking the gloss, make sure that I got good coverage here. And then here, I'm going to go ahead and spray just cool airbrush air on the piece, get it all dried down. So go ahead and work on the next color. All right, so we're going to go ahead and use this Vallejo Copper Mecha color. Honestly, I just really like the deep copper tone that this has, and it's pretty easy to spray. They come pretty thin, but I always like to thin my paint just a little bit. So we're going to use that same thinning solution. With this, I'm going to end up doing a 3-to-1 solution with the paint. So that's 3 parts paint, 1 part thinning solution. Go ahead and get that mixed up. And if you're ever curious, I'm always spraying at around 20 to 25 psi out of my brush. I feel like that gives me the best consistency with sometimes how thick some of this paint can be, and just acrylics in general. So give this a good stir uh, with whatever implement you have. But again, I like the old needle here. And again, I'm looking for that good consistency. So I'm looking for good opacity as I take it up and just a bit of a drip back. That tells me that my paint's ready and mixed good. So we're going to go ahead and load this in the brush and then start laying down this copper color on that same plastic sheet. All right, so my brush is ready. Got that same primed PLA sheet that we had before. I've been letting it sit for about an hour before I went ahead and hit it with the copper. So we're going to go ahead and spray. Same thing. Going to use a good mist coat. Just get a little bit of color on there to allow our paint to bite. I like to always use these opposing patterns when I do my mist, just to allow it a little bit better coverage and go from there. So around the edge, get that sprayed, and then I am just laying down that color now with a good half overspray. So I'm always doing about 2 to 3 coats, and let's go ahead and just spray that copper on. I'm checking it against the light here just to see what's wet, make sure I'm getting a good coverage. And just giving it one other thick coat. That looks good to me. And here I'm just giving it just a little bit of air just to kind of help it dry up just a touch. Okay, after this dries, I'm going to go ahead and put this on a spike. We're going to let it sit for 24 hours, and then we'll go ahead and get over here painting. So 24 hours later, I'm bringing this copper plate over, and we're going to start our first series of washes. So I like this Citadel color. This nice oxidized, it really gives me that verdigris look that I'm going for, but I'm using this as my mid-tone. I can say that this process is something you got to really trust. There's going to be lots of times as we're working on it where might not be happy with it, might not really know where we're going, but you know, like Bob Ross used to say, everything is a happy little mistake. So sometimes we just got to work with those. But when I lay down this wash, I'm going real heavy. I'm not really thinning anything down. I'm just getting my brush a little bit wet and just dunking it in that wash color and just going for it. So as you can see, I'm being real random. I'm not being careful at all. I'm being real heavy, real random. What I'm really looking for is to just build the paint, create streaks. I'm looking for drips. I'm looking for any kind of random piece that I can get out of the paint, and then really just kind of creating from there, seeing how the piece wants to look. You'll see this a lot when you're doing Gundams. Sometimes the paint will sit a little differently on a shoulder or a foot or on the head, and you really just got to kind of play to it and let every piece be a little unique. But here I am tapping it in, giving it a little extra streaks, and trying to build up some color in a couple areas, namely on the side. I'm trying to think about, where would something oxidize? Where might it be a little bit more exposed? And honestly, just having a lot of fun as I'm doing this. So I like to tap to build up color in certain spots. And again, be random, be creative. Let it just kind of come together and see what happens. Painting isn't necessarily something you got to be perfect at. I think there's a lot of creativity and freedom that you can have in this. And again, here I'm just going heavy, letting it build up, and just seeing how I'm going to put it all together. So after I get done with this mid-tone, I'm going to go ahead and put the piece on a part stand and let some of those drips build up as the part dries. So I'm going to let this end up drying for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then after that's done, we'll go ahead and get back on with our next set of washes and start building up the shadow. All right, now that we're back after about 10-15 minutes of drying, I'm going to go ahead and hit it with this shadow color, Vallejo Black Green. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get a few drops of it on the wet palette here. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and get quite a bit of water off the brush here. We're looking for a real thin consistency. I want just a little bit of opacity out of this paint. So after I get about equal parts water, I'm going to go ahead and thin that down, get it off the brush. And a little tip that I like to use, or I like to share, is wipe this on your wet palette. See the opacity before you go to hit a part. You can wipe it on your glove. I know a lot of guys like to do that, but sometimes I like to see how it looks on the palette first, make sure that my opacity's set for what I'm looking for. So after we're all ready, go ahead and grab that part, and now we're going to start building up the shadows. Same thing as before. We're going to be real heavy with it and real random. You'll notice as you're starting to go through here that the shadows will build up naturally on the edges of our midtone and start to help punch some of those up. So I'm going to go ahead and get through this. I'll let you guys watch along as we go ahead and build up that shadow color. And same thing as before. I like to go ahead and go heavy, like to tap in the color. I like to try to follow some of the previous strips from the midtone as I build in the shadows, really focusing on edges. As you can see on the right side there, that shadow is really holding against the line of the midtones that we put on so heavy, and this will help create a lot of an oxidized effect that we are looking for. So I'm pretty happy with how this looks. Got a lot of shadow on here, got good coverage, and I'm gonna go ahead and let this dry for 10-15 minutes, just like we did with our midtones, and then come back with our highlight color. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and grab our highlight color. So I'm using this Vallejo Verdigris. I like the way this looks. Now, I gotta tell you right now that with this color, this is gonna be the heaviest trust the process that we're gonna get into. It's gonna end up making our whole piece look very white as we put this wash over. There's gonna be a lot of moments where you're thinking, did I mess up? Did I go too far? But believe me, just go ahead and trust the process on this. So we're gonna end up doing the same 1-to-1 ratio, possibly a little bit more water, depending on the exact look that you're going for. But I'm going to go ahead and get this stirred up real deep, and then we're going to end up checking this on the palette just as before. So this is with a 1-to-1 ratio. That's a little dark for what I'm looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit more water, thin this down just a little bit more, and then you'll see the next opacity that I'm going for. And this is about what you're going to want to try to aim for. So quite a bit lighter. All right, so we're going to go ahead and grab that part again. And as you can see, after it's drying for 10-15 minutes, we got some nice drips. We got some nice pooling of the shadow color, really holding on to the edges of our midtone, really what we're looking for. So again, trust the process. Let's go over this with the same type of wash, but now with our highlight color. We're going to go heavy. So with this, I like to make sure that the wash is very thin and the paint is breaking. I'm also trying to look to see these little bubbles that I'm getting. I like these little bubbles. It creates a lot of little dots for the weathering effect. Kind of looks like rain and other little parts of oxidation on it. And I think it adds a really neat little effect. It was honestly a mistake that I just kind of came across, and I've been just trying to repeat it with more and more water in the paint to try to get more of these bubbles. So hope you kind of experiment with the same, and sometimes mistakes lead to really nice results. So again, just tapping in the color, getting really nice and streaky. Don't worry too much about the streaks. As this dries, everything will even out and you won't see any of the brush strokes. But go ahead and keep getting that color in there. If you're not happy with anything, you can always add a little extra water to your brush and use it like an eraser. So I'm pleased with how this looks. I got bubbles, I got some good highlight color here, and it's created some really nice, interesting effects that I'm looking for. And we're going to go ahead and let this dry for another 10-15 minutes, and then we'll be back with our midtone. Okay, so 10 to 15 minutes later, here's what we're looking at. I like the way everything's dried here. Then now we're going to be ready for our midtone, our last application of washes, and then after that, the magic will start to happen. So after another 10-15 minutes of drying, we're going to come back with our Citadel wash and bring our midtones back up. This will give us a good consistency across the piece and really shoot in the oxidized look that we're going for. So with this wash, we're going to get the excess off the brush. We're going to go pretty heavy and get it the same wash across the whole piece. Looking to bring those midtones back up, take away some of the lightness. And just keeping the excess off the brush. Really just bringing this back in, trying to follow some of the same streaks that we've had before and some of the same drips. Now I'm trying to make sure that the brush is nice and wet so I can thin out the paint, move it around a little more, get some more drips, a little bit more streaking, and just kind of move it around. Again, have fun, be creative, see what kind of interesting effects you can get out of everything. And just like I'm doing, just having a good time, going slow, getting the paint in there, and just trying to create a little bit. All right, we're done with the wash, getting the midtones back on. Just taking a look at everything, seeing how it's come out. Pretty happy with this. So, again, we're going to let this dry another 10-15 minutes, and then we're going to start our dry brushing. And we're going to also use an effect here that I like to use. So, this is 10-15 minutes after the piece is dried. Really happy with it. I'm liking that I'm seeing shadows, highlights, drops, bubbles, all kinds of interesting effects. So I'm going to go ahead and use a little sponge here. It's just your standard dishwashing sponge, nothing fancy. I've cut it up in a little piece here. I like to get mine soaked just a touch in the water, then go ahead and put it down on your paper towel. Press out as much excess water as you can, because we're going to end up using this as kind of a dry brush effect, but you'll see how we go ahead and stipple everything on. So I'm using this game color, special effects, this corrosion. I tried a few different special effects colors, but I ended up with this because I really liked the deep blacks and browns that I got out of it. Also, depending on how heavy you apply it, you will end up with some nice bronzes and golds out of it as well. So let's go ahead and get that shook up and get that on the palette, and then we'll start stippling that on with our sponge. So with it on the wet palette, got a few drops there. Gonna go ahead and pat out the sponge a little bit more, trying to keep a little bit of moisture in there, but also get it as dry as possible. You definitely don't want this to be soaking wet. You'll probably end up with some unneeded effects and not really get all the stippling and different textures you can get out of the sponge. So tap some of that off. And I like to focus edges first. After we get some of that tapped into the edge here in a moment, go ahead and start hitting the piece straight on. Be random. Again, be creative. You can never have a little too much or too little. Each piece can look different. You can always change it or put a wash back over the top to tone it back down if you need. But just do whatever comes natural, to be honest. Have fun. So one thing I do try to focus on a little bit is follow where some of the copper is underneath the washes. We're going to use that in our dry brush effect. Try to show some of the transitions of aging and weathering and different levels of oxidation on the piece. Again, just going around the edges real heavy, being really random here. Okay, I'm liking the way this looks. Got some of it into the copper, got some on the edges. Figured a little more here wouldn't hurt. Less is always more. Let's remember that. Okay, so for the next part, we're going to get back into dry brushing. We're going to use the original copper color that we used before when we airbrush this piece. We would definitely want to punch up the undertones of copper and go from there. Now, if you've never dry brushed before, get out some new paper towel or, swap it around like I did here. We're going to want to wick off a lot of paint, quite a bit more than you think, but less paint on the brush will give us a better effect. We're not trying to streak as much on here. We're just trying to really do some edge highlights, use kind of an eraser type effect with the dry brush as we go back over the copper. So again, this is the Mecha Color Copper from Vallejo. Go ahead and shake that up, get that on the palette. Might as well turn that around so we can see exactly what I'm doing here. Now I'm using this Army Painter Masterclass dry brush. Found this at a pack at a local hobby store. Any dry brush will do. Just need something with some good stiff bristles. So load the brush and just wipe as much excess as you can. You want just little amounts of paint. Now I check it here on my thumb. It's covering decent. All right. And what I'm trying to focus here is where I've already tapped all the corrosion. I'm trying to give this area different depth, different colors. So going around the edges with the dry brush, I'm trying to punch up those. And every time you dip it in, wipe off a lot of paint. I want just a little bit on there. So here I'm going over where some of the copper is showing from the washes. Don't be scared. There's plenty of times when even I was doing this where I just had to trust the process. And what I've learned through my years of painting and some mistakes I've made is that you can use the dry brush as almost an eraser. So some of these places where I don't necessarily want as much of the wash color, I can sit there and just go over and over and over again, and that will start to erase the wash color very lightly. Really like the effect that I end up with. So I'm just trying to pick out some spots. Also, don't be scared to use your finger. Wipe some excess away. If you got a little bit too much there, just go ahead and wipe it. Especially when you're going with a weathered or an oxidized effect, those smears and streaks that you can get with your finger from excess paint and wiping that along the piece really creates depth and extra randomness, I found. So never be scared. You can always correct it. And I'm just using it as, again, more of an eraser effect. I'm trying to punch in some of the color, being light with it. You can see it's all very shiny. Okay, I'm just kind of taking a look at the piece, trying to figure out, if I need some more copper and whatnot, but I ended up going to put a little bit more copper on here and try to punch up some of those undertones, really try to show weathering and different levels of oxidation again. So load up that dry brush, wipe off as much paint as possible, check it on the back of the thumb. And here I want to use that eraser effect I was kind of talking about. Being light, letting the bristles do the work. I pushed a little too hard here and built up a little bit too much paint. But again, use your finger, wipe some of that off, build up some streaks, build up interesting texture. Sometimes we get the best results from little minor mistakes that we make. Everything can always be corrected or changed. Again, if you're not happy with the way this is coming out, you can always apply another wash. Let that tone it all back down. But here I went a little heavy, wipe off some of the excess paint that was building up there. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how this is looking now. So just starting to inspect, trying to show everyone, it's shiny. We got that copper undertone back in. But the next thing we're going to do is get a little bit of a wash, and I'm going to tone some of this back down, and we're going to use a lot of water here. Get that brush real wet, get as much excess off as we can. As you can see, I dipped it straight in the water. Brush is wet, paint's nice and thin, even with a wash. And we're just going to kind of come back in on some of those edges, a little bit of a smear with the finger. Create a few little more streaks. Tone it back down just a touch. Getting a little more on the edge there. And just really just being random. Just toning this one down. And you can see here that it's basically just a little bit of water and just the smallest amount of that wash paint still on there. Patting it all down. Okay, so we're going to bring everything all in an even consistency, and I'm going to end up spraying this with the Vallejo Matte Varnish from Mecha Color. Okay, after that's done, you can see everything's real even. All of our midtones, our shadows, our highlights, the under copper, all of that is even and consistent across the piece now. And we're going to go ahead and use an ink. I like this FW Sepia ink. I feel it has a lot of pigment in it, a lot of good color, and I can really thin it down to stretch it out. We can get oil slick looks, You could use it for panel lines. You can use inks for all kinds of things you might not have been aware of, so I highly recommend them. So here I'm using a Winsor Newton Zero Series 7. Any zero size brush should work for this effect. I've just used this Winsor Newton, and to me it's kind of my gold standard brush that I like to have around. Get all kinds of really fun details out of that. So we're going to thin down this ink very far. I'm going to get up about 3 to 5 drops of water on the palette there. Keep the bristles nice and wet and drag that ink into the water. You can see it's starting to break down into a really light little brown. Checking it on the palette, seeing how it's looking for my opacity. Wiped off some excess. And what I'm going to end up doing here with the ink is just following the shadows. We're going to end up following a lot of the shadows and using my finger here to really add the water streak effects. And with inks, I've learned to always get the excess off the brush. Otherwise, you might end up with a little bit too much pigment. I'm just moving the drops of water here, drops of ink around. Running it through that corrosion to help create a water effect. Following the shadow lines that we had from our second wash on the piece. And you can get really creative with this. For me personally, I like to follow the shadows. I like to try to create new shapes, maybe where there's a little bit more oxidation or paint on a model compared to some other pieces where it might be a little bit more light. I've also learned that if you let the ink sit for just a few seconds on the piece and then wipe it off, you'll get a nice strong streak. And again, just pushing that ink drop all the way down, letting it sit for just a minute to bite into the piece a little bit, and then streak it down. And here I'm starting to create some interesting textures, punching up some shadows you might not have seen before in the oxidation, trying to create depth. I feel out of all the details we'll end up doing, this one is one of my favorites. This to me is the most free form, the most creative I can be. Just being random, just having fun. Again, streak that down. Filling up that shadow a little bit more on this main one. Adding some more of that streak, that water. Where would water fall on this? How would rain look after years and years of oxidizing? Creating interesting little shapes. Just again, putting in as much depth as I can. And just being very light with the brush. As you can see, the ink on the brush is stretching real far. Less is more. I'm liking the way this is looking, but always do a little more. This is what makes the washes so interesting to me and why we laid them on so heavy. They create a lot of these pooling effects, a lot of areas for us to punch in shadows, add depth, add more streaks, make everything work for you. Painting shouldn't be cumbersome. It should be fun. You should be able to have a lot of creative processes and creative freedom in the pieces that you're doing. Okay, so I'm happy with this. Give it a final look here. Is there anything else I think I need to do? Is there anything you would do differently? How happy are you with the piece? But I'm pretty happy, and if you've followed along, we should end up with a really nice looking copper patina. Here's an end shot of what I came up with after another set of varnish. See you next time.